History often prefers to forget its mistakes, especially when those mistakes were made by the men in white coats who promised us a brighter, safer future. In the early 1950s, the world was drunk on the promise of the atomic age. Science was not just a tool, it was a religion, and radiation was its holy spirit. It was the era where children could walk into a shoe store and stare into a fluoroscope to see the bones of their feet glowing green, just for the fun of it. It was a time when the invisible power of the atom was seen as a benevolent force, a modern miracle that would power our cities and cure our bodies. And at the center of this medical utopia sat the pregnant woman, trusting and vulnerable, placing her life and the life of her unborn child into the hands of an establishment that believed it could do no wrong. In hospitals across Britain and America, a procedure known as pelvimetry had become routine. It was clean, efficient, and supposedly harmless. Doctors, eager to use their shiny new machines, would beam high doses of X-rays directly into the wombs of expectant mothers. The goal was simple: to check the position of the baby and the size of the mother's pelvis to ensure a safe delivery. It was standard protocol, a tick-box exercise in modern obstetrics. If you were pregnant in London or New York in 1955, there was a high probability you would be ushered into a cold, dark room, told to hold your breath, and irradiated. The doctors smiled, the machines buzzed, and nobody asked questions. Because why would you? These were the experts. They were the giants of the age. But in the shadow of these giants, a storm was gathering, unnoticed by the celebrated professors and the confident surgeons. Entered Dr. Alice Stewart. She was not a radical. She was not a protester screaming at the gates. She was a meticulous, quiet epidemiologist at Oxford University, a woman working in a field dominated by men who viewed her work with a mix of indifference and condescension. In 1955, the Medical Research Council handed her a project that nobody else really wanted. It was considered a soft subject, a dead end for a serious career. They asked her to look into a rising anomaly: childhood leukemia. Cases of leukemia in young children were spiking, and no one knew why. The establishment had their theories: viruses, genetics, perhaps simple bad luck, but they didn't really know, and frankly, they didn't expect a woman with a clipboard to find the answer. They gave her a paltry budget of £1,000 and sent her on her way, expecting a neat little report that would gather dust in a university archive. They underestimated her. They underestimated the power of a woman who was willing to listen when others only wanted to lecture. Alice Stewart didn't retreat to a laboratory to peer into microscopes. She went to the source. She decided to do something revolutionary for the time. She decided to ask the mothers. She designed the Oxford Survey of Childhood Cancers, a massive, grinding undertaking that involved traveling across the country, knocking on doors, and sitting in the living rooms of grieving women who had just lost their children. She asked them about everything: their diet, their habits, their illnesses, and their medical history. She was looking for a pattern in the chaos of tragedy. She was hunting for a ghost. And as the questionnaires began to pile up on her desk, a terrifying correlation began to emerge from the ink and paper. It wasn't the food, it wasn't the viruses, it was the doctors. The data that Alice Stewart uncovered was not just a statistic, it was a scream from the silence. As she analyzed the mountain of questionnaires returned by the grieving mothers, a single, chilling factor stood out with undeniable clarity. The mothers of children who had died of leukemia were far more likely to have undergone abdominal X-rays during pregnancy than the mothers of healthy children. The correlation was stark, mathematical, and horrifying. Stewart crunched the numbers again and again, looking for an error, a mistake, any other explanation. But the truth remained stubborn. A single X-ray scan on a pregnant mother doubled the risk of the child dying from cancer within the first 10 years of life. In 1956, Alice Stewart published her preliminary findings in The Lancet.
It should have been a moment of triumph. She had found a way to save thousands of children from a gruesome death. She had exposed a hidden killer in the very heart of the hospital. She expected the medical community to be shocked, yes, but grateful. She expected protocols to change. She expected the X-ray machines to be turned off. Instead, she walked into a bawsaw. The reaction from the medical establishment was not gratitude. It was vicious, coordinated hostility. Alice Stewart had committed the ultimate sin. She had told the gods of medicine that they were killing their worshippers. The pushback was immediate and brutal. Leading doctors and radiologists, men whose entire careers were built on the safety of their machines, mocked her methodology. They didn't attack her math. The math was sound. Instead, they attacked the mothers. They concocted a theory called recall bias. They argued that grieving mothers, desperate to find a reason for their child's death, were simply remembering X-rays that never happened or over-reporting them compared to mothers of healthy children. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They used the trauma of these women to discredit the science that could have saved them. These women are hysterical, the implication went, and you cannot trust their memories. But it wasn't just the doctors. Stewart had unknowingly stepped onto the third rail of 1950s geopolitics. This was the height of the Cold War. Governments were pouring billions into nuclear technology, promising a future of atomic energy and weapons. The idea of low-level radiation, a mere X-ray could be deadly, was a direct threat to the nuclear industry. If a simple medical scan could kill a fetus, what did that say about the safety of nuclear power plants or the fallout from bomb tests? Stewart wasn't just fighting a medical board, she was fighting the military-industrial complex. Her funding was slashed. The SOFT project became a pariah project. Prestigious committees closed their doors to her. She was labeled a troublemaker, a difficult woman, a bad scientist. The Department of Energy and other major bodies actively worked to suppress her findings, ensuring that her voice was drowned out by the roar of progress. For years, she was effectively exiled within her own profession. Yet she refused to recant. She kept her data. She kept her surveys. She knew what she had seen in those living rooms. She knew the truth, even as the world around her conspired to bury it. There is a terrible arithmetic to silence. It is measured not in years, but in small coffins. For over 2 decades, while the medical establishment debated, deflected, and denied Alice Stewart's findings, the X-ray machines continued to hum. Pregnant women continued to be ushered into those dark rooms. Doctors continued to smile and say, "It's perfectly safe," and children continued to die. This is the tragedy that history tried to erase, the gap between the knowledge and the action. Between 1956, when Stewart sounded the alarm, and the late 1970s, when the medical community finally, grudgingly admitted she was right, millions of fetuses were exposed to unnecessary radiation. Stewart spent those 20 years in a professional wilderness, shouting into the void. She was mocked as the woman who is always wrong by powerful figures in the nuclear establishment. They tried to starve her work of resources, hoping she would just go away or retire. But Alice Stewart was made of sterner stuff. She continued to expand the Oxford Survey, turning it into one of the largest and most comprehensive databases of childhood cancer in the world. She played the long game. She knew that eventually the bodies would pile up too high to hide. Vindication, when it finally came, was slow and bitter. In the 1970s, independent researchers, including a major study from Harvard, began to re-examine the data. They tried to disprove her, to find the flaws that the establishment insisted were there. But every time they ran the numbers, they came to the same inescapable conclusion. Alice Stewart was right. The low-level radiation from X-rays was deadly to the developing fetus. The recall bias excuse evaporated under scrutiny. The gaslighting collapsed. Slowly, quietly, without a grand apology or a parade, the protocols changed. The routine X-raying of pregnant women stopped. The medical world pivoted, adopting ultrasound technology instead. The warning labels appeared. The harmless miracle was finally recognized as the danger it always was. Alice Stewart had won, but the victory was hollow. She had been right for 20 years, and for 20 years she had been ignored. How many thousands of children died in that interim? How many lives were sacrificed on the altar of professional ego and industrial convenience? Dr. Alice Stewart lived to be 95, working until the very end. She never received the Nobel Prize she arguably deserved. She was never fully embraced by the establishment she humiliated. But her legacy is written in the lives of the millions of people walking the earth today who were never irradiated in the womb because one woman refused to back down. She taught us a painful lesson that we must never forget. Consensus is not truth, and authority is not infallible. Sometimes the truth is held by the lone voice in the wilderness, the one they try to silence, the one who remembers the names that history tried to cross out.